to our Elul podcast. This is the first of four. For Elul 5781, 2021. Elul is the last month on the Jewish calendar. It is the month that precedes the Yamim Noraim, the days of awe, the high holy days. In Hebrew, Elul is spelled Aleph, Lamed, Vav, Lamed. And some understand that name to be an acronym, kind of an abbreviation for the phrase Ani lidodi v'dodi li. I am my beloved's, and my beloved is mine. Those words are themselves from the Song of Songs, Shir HaShirim, the Bible's great love poem. And they're meant to evoke relationship between ourselves and God, relationships between ourselves and one another, also our own relationship with ourselves. Ani lidodi v'dodi li. I belong to my beloved belongs to me. Elul is that time of the year when we have an opportunity to begin to repair those connections, those relationships, to remap them, to rebuild them, to rethink them. As this Elul begins, I'm thinking a great deal about re-entry, about emergence, about what it means to step back into community, to step back into the world. Pennsylvania's lockdown began in March of 2020. Nomi and I came back from a trip to Israel and Barcelona just 3 weeks prior. We landed at JFK on February 20th, herded into an arrivals hall, everybody unmasked. Of course, I have no idea how much COVID might have been spread in that space and on that day. And 3 weeks later, we were in lockdown. And indeed, all of us spent the better part of a year and more, for the most part, at home. Some indeed had to be out for work purposes and for other things. But to the degree possible, we all stayed home. And now, 18 months later, we're at the front end of re-emerging, of stepping back out into the world, of being able to gather together in person, of being able to go out, of being able to be out. What does it mean to re-enter? What does it mean to emerge? I want to share with you a couple of pieces and a couple of thoughts built around that topic as Elul begins. The first of those pieces comes actually right out of the High Holy Day liturgy itself. One of the features of the liturgy on Yom Kippur is a service known as the service of the Kohen Gadol, the avodah, literally, of the Kohen Gadol, the work or sacred work of the high priest. The rabbis describe what the high priest did on Yom Kippur. He prepared himself, he offered a series of sacrifices, issued a series of confessions, and then stepped into the Holy of Holies, the sacred space within the temple, the place where, according to our tradition, God's presence dwells. Spent a few minutes there, and when the high priest emerged, he offered up a prayer. We recite a version of that prayer to this day as part of the Yom Kippur service, as part of Musaf, as part of Avodah. And it's a prayer that expresses the hope that the year ahead will be a good year, that it'll be a year filled with joy and bounty and good harvest and parnassah, good income, welfare. But there is also a description in our literature, it's not in the prayer book, but in our literature, of what the high priest looked like and what it felt like to see the high priest at that moment of emergence, that moment when he stepped back out into the world, when he re-entered. That description comes to us from a book from probably the 2nd century BCE, which is to say a book that is more than 2,000 years old. It's a book that's called Ben Sira. It was written originally in Hebrew. We know it for the most part in its Greek version, although one of the great finds of the Cairo Geniza, a little more than a century ago, were fragments of Ben Sira in Hebrew. And here's Ben Sira's description of the high priest emerging from inside the Holy of Holies. How glorious he was, surrounded by the people, as he came out from the place of the curtain. How glorious, looking forth from the tent when he went forth from that place. Like a brilliant star shining from amidst the clouds, like the full moon at festival time, like a dazzling sun in the kingly temple, or the rainbow's colors seen with the clouds, like a budding flower on a bough in springtime, or a lily sprung up along watercourses, like a northern flower in the summer heat, or the glowing coal of the incense offering, like a blossoming olive tree, vigorous, whose branches abound in fruit, when he donned his glorious vestments and put on his garments of splendor. What an emergence. It's triumphant. It's celebratory. It's beautiful. Aviva Zornberg writes about that moment. Says that the high priest comes to represent the intersection of the human and the divine, is in that moment transmuted into a vision of God's glory that registers no dissonance between inner and outer worlds. Glory inside, glory outside. Triumph inside, triumph outside. Well, that's one version of re-entry, one possibility of what it might look like, what it might feel like to step back out into the world. But alas, it's not our experience in this current moment of re-entering and of stepping back out into the world. It feels a whole lot less triumphant, a whole lot more ambiguous, and a whole lot more complicated. There's another moment in our liturgy of re-entry and re-emergence. It's that moment when Jonah is spit back out by the great fish that swallows him in the course of the book of Jonah, which is the Haftorah, the prophetic reading that we'll take on the afternoon of Yom Kippur. Jonah's in the belly of that great fish, sometimes translated as a whale, for 3 days and 3 nights. Jonah in the whale does offer up a prayer. And that prayer, like this description of the high priest, is filled with triumph. Jonah said, in my trouble, I called to the Lord. God answered me. From the belly of Sheol I cried out. You heard my voice. You cast me into the depths, into the heart of the sea. The floods engulfed me. All your breakers and billows swept over me. I thought I was driven away out of your sight. Would I ever gaze again upon your holy temple? The waters closed in over me. The deep engulfed me. Weeds twined around my head. I sank to the base of the mountains. The bars of the earth closed upon me forever. Yet you brought my life up from the pit, Lord my God. When my life was ebbing away, I called Adonai to mind. My prayer came before you into your holy temple. Those who cling to empty folly forsake their own welfare. But I, with loud thanksgiving, will sacrifice to you. What I have vowed, I will perform. Deliverance belongs to Adonai. What a great moment of triumph that re-entry is for Jonah. But of course, very quickly, indeed immediately in the telling of the book, Jonah goes right back to being the same old Jonah. Ambivalent, recalcitrant, grumpy. His moment of re-entry may feel triumphant to him, but real life takes over pretty quickly. At the beginning of the summer, there was a remarkable news report of a lobster diver who was swallowed by a humpback whale off the coast of Provincetown, Massachusetts on Cape Cod. A little before 8 o'clock on a Friday morning, veteran lobster diver Michael Packard went into the water. It was his second dive of the day. Jumped off the side of his boat, John Jay, surrounded by a fleet of boats catching striped bass. The water was 60 degrees, nice and warm, the visibility about 20 feet. Packard jumped in and was swallowed whole by a humpback whale. Here's what he had to say. All of a sudden, I felt this huge shove, and the next thing I knew, it was completely black. I could sense I was moving, and I could feel the whale squeezing with the muscles in his mouth. Initially, Packard thought he was inside a great white shark, but realized when he couldn't feel any teeth and hadn't suffered any obvious wounds, that he had in fact been swallowed by a whale. I was completely inside, he said. It was completely black. I thought to myself, there's no way I'm getting out of here. I'm done. I'm dead. All I could think of was my boys. They're 12 and 15 years old. Packard was in that whale for 30, maybe 40 seconds. And inside he struggled, moved around, and the whale began shaking its head. So Packard actually could tell that the whale didn't like his own moving around. And lo and behold, the whale spit him out. I saw light, he said, and he started throwing his head side to side, and the next thing I knew, I was outside in the water. The next thing that happened after that was that Michael Packard ended up in the hospital. By later on Friday morning, he was able to offer a thumbs up to visitors. And much later that night, in fact, appearing on Jimmy Kimmel Live, he said, "I want to apologize to the whale." That's a whole different kind of re-entry. spit back into the world, spit back out into real life and into community. Earlier this year, I participated in a workshop that focused on an approach to change that's called the strategy of emergence. One of the texts that we spent some time with is a very short document that's called Principles of Emergence Strategy. Here are the principles. Small is good. Small is all. The large is a reflection of the small. Change is constant. Be like water. As Bruce Lee once put it, you must be shapeless, formless like water. When you pour water in a cup, it becomes the cup. When you pour water in a bottle, it becomes the bottle. When you pour water in a teapot, it becomes the teapot. Water can drip and it can crash. Become like water, my friend. There is always enough time for the right work. There is a conversation in the room that only these people at this moment can have. Find it. Never a failure, always a lesson. Less prep, more presence. And finally, what you pay attention to grows. Over these coming days, weeks, months, we'll have, God willing, the opportunity to emerge and to re-enter, to step out, back out into the world, to step out, back out into community. It is cause for celebration. But I suspect it won't be triumphant in the way that the high priest's emergence from the Holy of Holies was. More complicated. Little steps at a time. Small, indeed, is all. And the large is just made up of lots of small. My hope and prayer as we emerge, as we step out together, as we reconnect in community, is that it will be able to do so with a real sense of humility and a real sense of gratitude. Grateful that we are healthy enough to be able to be together, to be able to step out. Grateful for all that we have. And humble in the face of the large realities and large forces that surround us and that are part of our lives and part of our world. It may not be as momentous as being spit back up by a humpback whale off the coast of Provincetown, Massachusetts, but it will be a moment of great joy, a moment of great celebration, and I very much look forward to it. Thank you for joining us for this first Elul podcast of 5781. Talk to you next week.